Hi. So today we're going to do something very similar to what we did yesterday. In fact, we're actually going to do the same thing using different stories. So yesterday I read a fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood, on the computer, and you made the pictures for the story in your mind because I didn't read them from a book where I could show you the pictures. And then I read you a story that was inspired by Little Red Riding Hood. And I did have that in a book so you could see all the pictures. And I asked you to compare the two to see some of the things that were the same and some of the things that were different. And that's something that really needs a lot of practice and helps you to become a much better reader because you really understand the stories when you start to think about all of the little details that are the same and different between two stories. So that's what I'm going to have you do today. Again, I'm going to read a story on the computer. This time I'm going to read the fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk. And then I'm going to read another story that's similar, but not the same, that was inspired by the original fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk. So here we go. Once upon a time there lived a widow woman, which means her husband had died, and her son Jack on their small farm in the country. Every day Jack would help his mother with the chores, chopping the wood, weeding the garden, milking the cow. But despite all of their hard work, they were still very poor, with barely enough money to stay fed. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" said the woman one spring day. "We don't have enough money to buy seed for the farm this year. We must sell our cow, Old Bess, with the money and buy enough seed to plant a good crop." "All right, mother," said Jack. "It's market day today. I'll go into town and sell Bess." So Jack took the cow's halter, which is like her collar, but it goes around her face and the back of her neck because cows and horses also are very strong. So a collar like a dog wouldn't be strong enough to lead them. So they have a halter that you can hook a leash, like a leash onto, and walk them that way. He hadn't gone far when he met a funny-looking old man who said to him, "Good morning, Jack. Where are you off to this fine morning?" "Good morning to you," said Jack, wondering how the little old man knew his name. "I'm going to the market to sell our cow, Bessie." "Well, what a helpful son you are," said the man. "I have a special deal for such a good boy like you." The little old man looked around to make sure no one was watching, and then he opened his hand and showed Jack what he had. "Beans?" asked Jack, looking a little confused. "3 magical beans to be exact, young man," said the old man. 1, 2, 3. So magical are they that if you plant them overnight, by morning, they grow right up to the sky," promised the little man. "And because you're such a good boy, they're all yours in trade for that old milking cow." "Really?" said Jack. "And you're quite sure they're magical?" "I am indeed, and if it doesn't turn out to be true, you can have your cow back." "Well, that sounds fair," said Jack, and he handed over Bessie's halter, pocketed the beans, and headed back home to show his mother. "Back already?" asked his mother when he walked in. "I see you haven't got old Bess. You've sold her so quickly. How much did you get for her?" Jack smiled and reached into his pocket. "Just look at these beans, Mother. They're magical. Plant them overnight and—" "What?" cried Jack's mother. "Oh, silly boy, how could you give away our milking cow for 3 measly beans?" And with that, she did the worst thing Jack could imagine. She burst into tears. Jack ran upstairs to his little room in the attic, so sorry he was, and threw the beans angrily out the window, thinking, how could I have been so foolish, which means not smart. He's thinking he did not make a good choice. "I've broken my mother's heart." After much tossing and turning, finally he drifted off to sleep. When he woke up the next morning, his room looked strange. The sun was shining into part of it like it normally did, but the rest was dark and shady. So Jack pulled up the shades, dressed himself, and went to the window. And what do you think he saw? The beans he had thrown out the window into the garden had sprung up into a big beanstalk, which went up and up and up until it reached the sky. Using the leaves and twisty vines like the rungs of a ladder, Jack climbed and climbed and climbed until at last he reached the sky. And when he got there, he found a long, broad road winding its way through the clouds to a tall, square castle in the distance. Jack ran up the road toward the castle, and just as he reached it, the door swung open to reveal a horrible lady giant with one great eye in the middle of her forehead. As soon as Jack saw that, he turned to run away, but she caught him and dragged him into the castle. "Don't be in such a hurry. I'm sure a growing boy like you would like a nice big breakfast," she said. "It's been so long since I got to make breakfast for a boy." Well, the lady giant wasn't such a bad sort after all, even if she was a little odd. So she took Jack into the kitchen, gave him a chunk of cheese and a glass of milk, but Jack had only taken a few bites when thump, 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 the whole house began to tremble, which means to shake. "Here, oh dear, come quick, jump in here." She hurried Jack into a large copper pot sitting beside the stove, just as her husband, the giant, came in. He ducked inside the kitchen and said, "I'm ready for my breakfast. I'm so hungry I could eat 3 cows. Ah! What's this I smell? Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Oh, nonsense, dear," said his wife. "We haven't had a boy for breakfast in years. Now, go wash up, and by the time you come back, your breakfast will be ready for you." So the giant went off to tidy up. Jack was about to make a run for it when the woman stopped him. "Wait until he's asleep," she said. "He always takes a little snooze after he eats breakfast." So he peeked out of the pot just as the giant returned to the kitchen carrying a basket filled with eggs and a sickly-looking white hen. The giant poked the hen and growled, "Lay!" And the hen laid an egg made of gold, which the giant added to the basket. An egg made of gold. After his breakfast, the giant went to the closet and pulled out a golden harp with the face of a sad young girl. The giant poked the harp and growled, "Play!" And the harp began to play a gentle tune. A harp is a musical instrument that has strings like a guitar or a violin that you can pluck, but it's tall and it sits on the ground and you kind of wrap your hands around it and the strings are like this. You might have seen one of those before. The giant began to nod his head and to snore until his house shook. And when he was quite sure the giant was asleep, Jack crept out the copper pot and began to tiptoe out of the kitchen. Just as he was about to leave, he heard the sound of the harp girl weeping, which means the girl playing the harp was crying. Jack bit his lip, sighed, and went back to the kitchen. He grabbed the sickly hen and the singing harp. So he grabbed the hen that lays the golden eggs and the singing harp, and he began to tiptoe back out. But this time the hen gave a cackle, which woke the giant. And just as Jack got out of the house, he heard him calling, "Wife, wife, what have you done with my white hen and my golden harp?" Jack ran as fast as he could, and the giant, realizing he'd been tricked, came rushing after, away from the castle, down the broad winding road. And when he got to the Beanstalk, the giant was only 20 yards behind him, when suddenly he saw Jack disappear. Confused, the giant peered through the clouds and saw Jack underneath, climbing down the Beanstalk for dear life. The giant stomped his foot and roared angrily, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll have his bones to grind my bread." And the giant swung himself down onto the beanstalk, which shook with his weight. Jack slipped, slid, climbed down the beanstalk as quickly as he could, and after him climbed the giant. As he neared the bottom, Jack called out, "Mother, please, hurry, bring me an axe, bring me an axe." And his mother came rushing out with Jack's wood-chopping axe in her hand. But when she came to the enormous beanstalk, she stood shocked with fright. Jack jumped down, got hold of the axe, and began to chop away at the beanstalk as fast as he could. Luckily, because of all the chores he'd been doing over the years, he was very good at chopping, and it didn't take him long to chop through enough of the beanstalk that it began to teeter, which means kind of wave back and forth. The giant felt the beanstalk shake and quiver, so he stopped to see what was the matter. And then Jack gave one last big chop with the axe, and the beanstalk began to topple over, which means it began to fall. Then the giant fell down and broke his crown, and the beanstalk came toppling after. The singing harp thanked Jack for rescuing her from the giant. She had not liked being locked up in the closet all day and night and wanted nothing more than to sit in the farmhouse window and sing to the birds and the butterflies in the sunshine. With a bit of patience and his mother's help, it didn't take long for Jack to get the sickly hen back in good health, and the grateful hen continued to lay a fresh golden egg every day. Jack used the money from selling the golden eggs to buy back old Beth's purchased seed for the spring crop and fix up his mother's farm. He even had enough left over to invite every one of his neighbors over for a nice meal, complete with music from the singing harp. And so Jack, his mother, old Bess, the golden harp, and the white hen lived happily ever after. And that's the end of Jack and the Beanstalk. So let's keep in mind some of the main characters in the story that you'll want to listen for in the next story. There's Jack, there's his mom, there's the funny little old man with the magic beans, there's the giant, there's the giant's wife, there's the golden harp, and there is the hen that lays the golden eggs. So keep those in mind and ask yourself as I read the next one if the characters are the same or if they're different, and if the story is the same or if it's different. You can think about things like the setting, which is where the story happens. Listen for this and see if it happens in the same farm kind of neighborhood as it did in that story. Not lots of houses together, lots of spread out farms. Think about whether there's a castle in the clouds. Think about whether the beanstalk grows as it does in Jack and the Beanstalk. And just listen for things that you might notice that I'm not even thinking of. This is called Jack and the Baked Beanstalk. Jack and the Baked Beanstalk. This is written by Colin Stimpson. Colin Stimpson wrote the words and did the illustrations. And here's a picture of some baked beans, which are quite different from a green beanstalk. A beanstalk would be a big, tall, green plant. Jack lived and worked in an old burger truck with his mom and his dog, Bella. Their sign read, Jack's Fast Food, which was funny because the truck had broken down a long time ago and it stayed in the same place ever since, parked on the edge of a very busy city. So think about the setting. It's not the same. Jack and his mom didn't really mind. They were proud of their little cafe. They kept the place clean, served tasty food, and always had plenty of happy customers. One winter day, the city council decided to build an overpass, which is like a freeway, so that more people could get to work faster. The old road where Jack's cafe stood was to be closed. At first, things didn't seem very different. Jack and his mom were busy feeding the builders eggs and sausages, burgers and fries, and cups and cups and cups of coffee. But when the overpass was finally complete, all of the workers went away. So you can see they're building what's a bit like a bridge, but it's more like a freeway that goes over a street. All day long, traffic sped overhead as people hurried in and out of the city. No one stopped to visit the old burger truck anymore. The new road had swept the customers right away. Soon Jack and his mom were down to their last few pennies. Go to the store and buy some milk and coffee beans, Jack, said Jack's mom, putting on a brave face. Everybody still likes a good cup of coffee. So if you look closely down in the bottom corner, you can see their little truck with all the cars racing around. And nobody stopping. On his way to the store, Jack met an old man who asked him why he looked so sad. Jack explained about the overpass and his burger truck. I think I can help you, said the old man thoughtfully. Forget the coffee beans. These are magic baked beans. I wouldn't normally sell them, but you look like a boy who would know their true worth. So Jack had read enough fairy tales to know that you don't turn down an offer like that. Baked beans were his favorite food in the whole wide world, so he couldn't resist tasting some magic ones. Thanking the man, Jack exchanged his last pennies for the can of beans and went home. You did what? Shouted his mother when Jack showed her the can. But Mom, they're magic baked beans. The old man promised, said Jack, realizing how silly he sounded. Furious, his mom threw the can out the window and sent Jack straight to bed without any supper. Early the next morning, Jack woke up to find his room bathed in a curious green light. Strange branches twisted through the window. At the end of each shoot dangled a silver can of baked beans. It's a magic baked beanstalk, Jack said, trying not to wake his mother. If I remember right, there should be heaps of treasure at the top of the beanstalk. After quickly eating a breakfast of the best beans he'd ever tasted, Jack crept outside. Are you ready, Bella? Jack said, grabbing hold of the long green tendril. A tendril is a word that can be used to describe a group of hairs, or in this case, a group of little stems that are growing off of the beanstalk. So he grabbed one of the long stems on the beanstalk and said, Mom will be worried when she notices we're gone, but if this is a really magic beanstalk, she'll forget about being angry when we bring her back some treasure. So up between the leaves they climbed high into the sky, and finally Jack and Bella reached the top. Just above the clouds, the last branch wound its way to the steps of the biggest castle Jack had ever seen. Look at the big dollar signs on the front door of the castle. Squeezing under the front door, Jack found himself in an enormous room. Suddenly there was a bone-shaking clunk, and then another and another, followed by the sound of someone singing. Fee, fi, fo, fummy, I'm always counting money. Be it silver, be it gold, it'll make me happy, or so I'm told. Sure enough, Jack could see towers of gold coins stacked up in front of a huge table, and behind it, an even more gigantic giant. Oh, whispered Jack. I forgot about this part of the story. But just as Jack and Bella turned to run, the giant spotted them, which means he saw them. A huge hand reached down and scooped Jack and Bella high up in the air before dropping them on the table. In front of them was the most enormous chicken Jack had ever seen. We have visitors, boomed the giant. So I see, squawked the chicken. And we know just what to do with visitors, don't we? Said the giant. Now you stay there. I'll be back in a jiffy. And with that, the giant grabbed a handful of the chicken's eggs and marched off to his kitchen. Soon the sound of clattering pots and pans was making the table tremble and shake. Is he going to eat us, chicken? Asked Jack. Don't you love that illustration with the giant's big face and the chicken? Don't be silly, clucked the chicken. He just wants to make you some lunch. He hasn't cooked for someone new in a very long time. As Jack watched, the giant switched on an enormous radio, and then his foot tapping along with the sound of the music, he began to make the biggest omelet Jack and Bella had ever seen. While wonderful smells wafted into the room, the chicken told Jack about life in the castle. Every day, all day, the giant counts his money, she clucked. He doesn't know what else to do with himself. It's hard for the radio. She's a magic one, you know. She can only play at lunchtime because the giant needs silence when he's counting. And just then, the giant appeared. Lunch is ready, he called out cheerfully. Are you feeling like this giant's a little different than the giant in Jack and the Beanstalk? I am. Over lunch, Jack told the giant all about life at the bottom of the beanstalk, and the giant told Jack about his money. Jack thought having such treasure was fantastic, but counting sounded a bit, well, boring. I do get pretty lonely up here, confessed the giant. Would you consider staying? You could help me count, and I could cook us tasty meals. Sorry, said Jack. I just couldn't leave my mom. I should be getting back. Can I come with you? Asked the giant. Can I come with you? Sang another small voice. Jack and the giant turned to the radio in surprise. I want to play songs all day long, said the radio. "And I've always wanted to stretch my wings," clucked the chicken. The giant looked glum, knowing he wouldn't be able to go, but he agreed that his friends deserved a change after all the years in his castle. With a heavy heart, the giant walked them all to the top of the beanstalk. "Are you sure you won't come with us?" asked Jack. "You could chase us."
"I'd love to," said the giant sadly. "But truth be told, I've always had a bit of a fear of heights. And it looks like a long way down. I better stay here and count my gold."
So Jack and Bella climbed on the chicken's back and clutching the radio, began the long journey to the ground.
"Goodbye, goodbye," hollered the giant, waving his handkerchief. "Do come again soon."
But as he leaned out over the beanstalk, trying to catch a last glimpse of his friends, here's a picture of him saying goodbye. There was a loud crack. Snap went the beanstalk, and down, down, down fell the giant. Crash, bang, wallop, right on top of the new overpass. Cars skidded in all directions. Fortunately, no one got hurt. "Are you all right?" asked Jack, who had luckily reached the ground just in time.
"No,"
said the giant as a gigantic tear splashed on the concrete below, and then another and another.
"Now that the beanstalk's broken, I can't go home. And without my money to count, I've got nothing to do. Whatever will become of me?"
"It isn't so bad," said Jack. "At least you're with your friends. Maybe if you try something you enjoy, you'll find you enjoy it more than counting money." And that's the story of how the Baked Beanstalk Cafe became the famous place that it is today. It's much bigger than the old place. It's new in almost every way. If you're ever passing through, do stop in, say hello to the giant chicken, or listen to the jumbo radio that plays music all day. The baked beans and eggs are always free, and to top it all, they have a very, very famous cook. So their little burger truck turned into the Baked Bean Cafe. And the giant stayed and enjoyed the rest of his life with his friends. And that's it. The end. So I hope you liked both stories. Take some time to think about the things that were the same, the things that were different. They were very, very different stories, much more different than the Little Red Riding Hood and Little Red Cowboy Hat yesterday. So have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.